You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. Hello, welcome to Garibaldi Red. My name is Matt Davis, hosting as ever, and we're going to do something slightly different this second episode of the week. We're going to talk with Reds fan and author David Marples about his new book, Reds and Rams, The History of the East Midlands Derby. It's out now, so we're going to talk about that, and we'll also get David's perspective as a fan on the season thus far and what he thinks might happen. So, David, good to have you with us. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Really pleased for being on the show, so I'm really grateful for you inviting me on. So, yeah, but all good, all good.
Well, I got a character reference off Greg, and as you said to me, I'm not sure that's a good thing or something along those lines. But yeah, Greg vouched for you as one of the good guys, so happy to have you with us.
Well, that's frightening that I've been judged by Greg Mitchell, but I'll just have to accept that and roll with it.
Yes, that's all we can do in the circumstances. So tell us a bit about yourself before we get into the book, just as a fan and an author.
Yeah, of course. I just general Forest busybody, really. Was behind a blog called In the Top One about 5 or 6 or maybe 7 years ago, and then one of the people who was behind Bandy and Shinty as well. I've been writing a regular column in the Forest Matchday programme, just entering my 7th season doing that, and that straddled the Fawaz era, which was a whole bunch of fun. And also one of the latest ventures is Trevor Francis Tracksuits. I am that guy who makes the Sabutio recreations, so I'll have to put my hands up and accept and own that. And yeah, this is my second book. The first book was called The History Boys, 30 Iconic Goals in the History of Nottingham Forest. That was about 5 or 6 years ago, and now we're here with the second book hitting the shelves on Monday, as it were.
Are you allowed to expose the secrets of the Sabutio videos? How long they take?
No. That would be like the Wizard of Oz peeking behind the curtain. And I think the magic is just best retained if I leave that all to your imagination.
You can find them on Twitter anyway. They're very good. They're good fun. So the book then, History of the East Midlands Derby. Tell us a bit about the history of the East Midlands Derby. I think I sent in the notes to you earlier in the week. I mean, when did it become a big thing? Is it a historical thing in terms of the size of the towns? Is it like an industrial thing, Brian Clough thing? What's the backstory?
All of those things, basically. It was fascinating researching the whole topic. This, really, because I was interested to find out it wasn't just a Brian Clough thing, as you alluded to, but this has been going on for quite a long time. So the book starts with almost sort of starting the Victorian era, where obviously we've got Derby, who've got their the mills and the industry and their engineering and the self-styled underdog, really. And being the centre of the railway industry, really. And we've got Nottingham, its reputation as being home of the rebels. We've got its lace market, a little bit more urban, perhaps, rather than rural Derby. And I think you can already see from the differences between those two places how that shapes these two cities in very different ways. There is a sort of some kind of strange sort of difference between them, a cultural difference, a historical difference, and very much a social experience as well. And this goes back to arguably 1892, basically, when Forest joined the league, the Football League. Derby had already been there for a while, but 1892, 1893 saw the first league fixture between Derby and Forest. Interestingly, there was a fixture out in India in August of that year between two army regiments, the Sherwood Foresters and the left-wing 2nd Battalion Derbyshire Regiment. If you are of Forest persuasion, which I'm sure you are watching this, Forest won 1-0. A Private Green scored the winner in August 92. Interestingly enough, it was reported that in the crowd were shouts of "play up Notts." So, rightly or wrongly, I can confirm that Notts Forest is a thing and goes back as far as 1892. So, we'd probably better start just dealing with that and accepting it in some ways. The first league games took place in October 1892. Forest beat Derby 3-2 at their racecourse ground. Then Steve Bloomer scored the first goal, an absolute legend for Derby County, who went on to score countless hat-tricks against Forest. And it wasn't a brilliant game. Apparently Forest were the better team. And obviously in the return leg at the Town Ground on Derby Road, near where the Savoy Theatre was, huge excitement, vigorously contested these games. Tensions ran extremely high. And this is even in the very first fixtures between these two teams. Another quote here a few years later: matches between Derby and either of the Nottingham clubs are always exciting. So keen is the rivalry between the two teams in matters of football. So Derby fans also, from the early days, saw people from Nottingham as different. The rivalry was there. They referred to Notts County as the Lambs, which I guess was some kind of insult to Nottingham folk compared with the rather more powerful Ram, as they would have it. So, in short, it's been going on an awful long time. And then in 1895, we had couple of brothers called Frank and Fred Foreman, who kind of stoked the fans of this rivalry. And really sort of arguably tipped it into antipathy towards each other. Both players left Derby to go to Forest to play first team football, and these were the days of the amateur ranks as well. So there was accusations by Frank in the local press of broken promises, and he warned other players, don't sign for Derby. He wanted to play football. They wanted first team football. So these kind of transfers and players wanting to leave for first team football have been going on longer than we thought of. And like I said, the Foreman brothers perhaps was a turning point or a key sort of signpost in the rivalry between Derby and Forest. And well, we all know the rest of the story since then.
So was it elevated in the 70s with Clough then, or was it already, from your research, peaked as much as it is now?
Yeah, I think prior to Clough, there was a period where they didn't play each other that frequently, to be honest. I'm just looking back round here. So yeah, in the sort of 60s, they were in different leagues, so that kind of went off the boil a little bit. Some will tell you that the rivalry was with Leicester, but I'm not sure. It's difficult to say with certainty. There was always that rivalry bubbling under. But obviously, when Clough came to Derby and started being incredibly successful, and then what we saw was the drain, or the sort of, in some ways, it's been a motorway of players going between Derby and Forest, which even to the current day has been a well-trodden path, shall we say. I think that's when the antipathy didn't, like I said, it didn't go away, but it was certainly resurrected with a passion, culminating in perhaps the most sort of fierce game, which was the FA Cup game in 1983, when Peter Taylor had come back to Derby, said he was retiring, came out of retirement. Forest, lo and behold, drew Derby in the FA Cup in January in 83. Taylor was in the hot seat, and Derby beat Forest 2-0, thanks to, in part, to an Archie Gemmell goal, which went past Steve Sutton. And I believe on that day there was rancor behind the scenes. There was a story that Brian wouldn't acknowledge Peter Taylor after the game and dropped various players because he thought they were going to go easy on Derby. And again, off the pitch after the game and around, let's just say, relations between fans weren't so great at that time either. So the Brian Clough thing is, and then we've got the constant thread with Nigel as well running through. So it's been bubbling over for an awful long time, and only now do we see a minor break in relationships between the two.
Yes, we'll come on to that shortly. You've gone into my next question there already around the most memorable games. I mean, which games stand out for you, be it through research or through personal experience in the stands?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Ben Osborne game, the Robert Earnshaw game. I also, there's a particular sort of favourite game. I think it was 1989 in August at our place, and Forest won 2-1. And there's one of the goals was scored by Stuart Pearce, and it wasn't a thunderbolt and it wasn't a free kick. It was a deft touch. If you can imagine that 80s team, Pearce picks up the ball in midfield. He does a 1-2 with, naturally, Nigel Clough. He gets it back and he gives it the most deft touch, just to poke it into the corner of the net, and it just sort of reaffirms what Stuart Pearce was all about. Just a superb player. So that was a personal favourite. I guess my second one, this might sound a bit odd, but it's a game our place last season. Given what was at stake, and given even at that stage, we all knew that either way, Forest wouldn't be playing Derby for a while, given that obviously the points deduction for Derby. I just thought it was incredibly important from a Forest perspective not to lose that game. if Forest had lost that game with Derby in the situation that they were, they would have always had that. They've got the 10 men, obviously, but they would possibly have had that, which would have meant even more, I think. You know, this idea that, yes, they've been useless. Yes, they've gone down to third tier, but we turned Forest over at the City Ground. And as a sort of a side issue to that one, it kept the bizarre run going that no Derby manager with the surname of Clough has won at the City Ground since 1925. So to lose that record to Wayne Rooney would have been, shall we say, disappointing.
So has your view of Derby changed from researching the book? I mean, I don't know to what degree you disliked them or not beforehand, but have you developed a grudging respect for them at all or not? Is it exactly as it was?
Got to be careful what we say here.
Yes.
I think that's a really good way to put it, actually, a begrudging respect. I mean, the first thing I will say is I'm not from Nottingham. So whilst I obviously have a feeling towards Derby via strong osmosis, given my lifelong support of Forest, you know, the whole local, the nuances of that and not being born in Nottingham. I understand, obviously, but I can't say I understand the deep roots of it. Although, having done the research that I've done, I think I'm a bit closer to understanding it. I think the interesting thing was looking at any football club's history. You're going to not sort of come around to like them, but just seem to understand them a little bit better. You know, the Robert Maxwell era in the 80s is a fascinating period, which probably deserves a book all on its own. And then also to understand that where they are now, this last season, I was trying desperately to keep up to date with the whole plethora of statements that were released by the EFL, by Quantuma, by Middlesbrough, by Steve Gibson, etc. And it just seemed to be changing the picture every day. So, you know, to try and keep up with it was a real task in itself. But I think part of the motivation for the book was to try to understand why these clubs, why these cities, why these sets of fans detest each other as much as they do. And in order to understand that, I felt I had to get a feel for what Derby County is and what kind of place Derby is, and that relationship between the club and its fans and how it's rooted in the community and its origins. So it's been, I would say that of any club, if you research it in as much depth, perhaps you're going to start to understand them. But yeah, I think I don't know about respect, but I certainly feel I understand this club and the city a little bit more than I did at the starting point of this task that I undertook.
Where are you from originally?
From Rotherham. So yeah, so there's a whole story to that. It's fairly straightforward, but obviously growing up in Rotherham in the early 80s, I'd alternate between going to see Rotherham and Forest. Dad wanted to go and see some really good football. From Rotherham to go and watch either the Sheffield clubs or the Leeds team was probably not an option, but down the road, literally just down an hour of the road, with this great football team who everybody loved, and certainly loved their manager anyway. So, you know, since 81, 82, that's when I started going and just, you know, like I said, understood through osmosis the rivalry between Forest and Derby.
Yeah, I only asked them. You're the first fan I've met. It's a very tiresome debate on Twitter this week around proper fans. What makes what qualifies you as a proper fan? But like you, I'm not from Nottingham,
right?
So I probably have a similar attitude to Derby and a different attitude to some Forest fans around. I don't, like Greg we mentioned, I didn't want to go out of business. I wanted to get relegated and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting around who's a proper fan and who's not a proper fan, and who gets to stay and who isn't.
Fascinating debate for another day. I think, but what you just said there really resonates. You know, people, it was a huge discussion at the time. Do you want to see Derby go out of business? And I think genuinely, well, as a football fan, I don't really want to see any club go out of business. And even though they're a deep, fierce rival, I think part of the looking at the nature of a rivalry, part of the joy of a rivalry is having them around so that you can beat them once in a while. Otherwise, the rivalry doesn't really seem to exist. So the pain of losing a local derby is absolutely horrendous. But I think in many ways that's counterbalanced by the joy of beating your rivals. And in an ideal scenario, you do play each other semi-regularly, but you always beat them. So for that reason, it was odd to sort of try to imagine a landscape without a fierce rival, because every club defines themselves just as much by their rival and who they don't get on with, just as much by how they see themselves as well. So, in short, I think it's nice that the Derby, the East Midlands rivalry is off the table for a little bit. I just think both clubs, 14 years, have been locked together intensely. I think everybody could have probably just do with a break from it. Least of all, because anytime a team loses the derby, a manager gets sacked. So it's nice to just sort of unlock from that situation for a while.
Well, I suppose the other thing is, touch wood, we want Forest to stay in the Premier League. So realistically, it's going to be quite a few years, we hope, before we play Derby again, don't we?
I think so, and that was how I kind of saw the book in the last chapter sort of panning out. I didn't really expect the two clubs to leave that table as dramatically as they did. With Derby hurtling through the trapdoor and Forest elevating, going up the stairway to heaven, if you like. So I really couldn't have foreseen that at all. But yeah, and that's why I think that the game at our place last season, which we kind of knew would be the last one for a while, was just incredibly important from a Forest perspective, not to lose that game, because it could. Well, there was a moment where there was a severe existential threat to Derby where we thought it might well be the last Derby. So it was a huge relief, I think, to not lose that game, and delicious to win that game.
Let's talk about the Premier League then. I mean, we're probably of a similar vintage. I've seen Premier League football, but my familiarity is Championship and even League One football. How are you finding it this season?
A learning experience. I think, like lots of people, I had no idea. I'm sure we've all been asked, how do you think they'll do? And usually you have an inkling. I had no idea for so many obvious reasons how we do this season. And I got to be honest, I'm still nowhere nearer knowing how it's going to pan out this season for, again, the very obvious reasons. We've got an entirely new squad. But the other thing that was an unknown for certainly myself, and it sounds like it for yourself as well, was that I didn't know what the gap would be between a half-decent mid-table Premier League side and a very good Championship side who's gained promotion. We all wanted to perhaps believe that there wasn't such an insurmountable gap. So, playing clubs like Everton and maybe teams like Southampton, you're thinking, how good do we need to be? Do we need to be at our absolute best to match these teams like Everton? If Everton are just, having a bad day and we're at our best, does that mean we automatically beat them? And it's that kind of intangible that I think we're starting to get some answers for, but I'm still not quite sure at all, where that sort of where that line is, where that standard is, least of all because we're not quite sure what we're about, really. I mean, we've had some very promising performances, but apart from the West Ham game, we've not really yielded much in terms of results and points. So we can take heart from the performances against Tottenham, from the performance against Everton, etc. But what I'm not quite sure about is what else do we need to do to get points? Now, on the one hand, that might just change, and the fact that luck might go with us a little bit, and we'll start putting some more chances away. And the horrible, negative pessimist in me is starting to worry that even when we're performing well, we're still not quite in a position to seal those points. So, we all hoped that the Bournemouth game would be a great barometer for us. We all know how that went. We probably don't want to revisit that old ground or go over that ground at all in any depth whatsoever. I think we have to just move on from that one. But obviously, I think the takeaway from that game was that we all expected us to sort of, well, we're better than Bournemouth. We've got a better squad. They're in disarray. This is 3 points for us. But cliche alert, even Bournemouth, that's not quite how the Premier League works.
So how many games do you think is a suitable data sample before we can judge?
It's an excellent question. I mean, I think 6 would be a standard, a good answer. And here we are, 6 games in. Are we any nearer? Probably not, because you've got to write the Man City game off. And the Bournemouth game, I wish we could write it off. We can't write it off. But in some ways, that we've just got to hope that's a total aberration as well, So in essence, 4 games in. Let's knock the Newcastle game off because that was the first game. So you could argue we're only 3 sort of serious games in on which to judge and have a sample size. In short, Matt, I'm kind of dodging your question. I've no idea. I mean, we'll go to Leeds. We'll play Fulham, isn't it? And I'd like to think that we'll have a much clearer idea there. But the thing that worries me is that obviously we go into this run of games And suddenly it's turned into we must get points from these games. Now, obviously, well, that is a situation we were going to be in all season anyway. But it just feels like there is, feels like there's some kind of pressure mounting, not to win every game. That'd be ridiculous. But certainly in the first instance to put a performance in against Leeds and Fulham for a sustained period of the game after the previous game, which shall not be named.
Yes, as we record this, I should say, the sad news about the Queen means we don't know if it's Leeds or Fulham next or even Leicester. But like you say, do you think too much has been made of these fixtures? I'll read them out this next run. As it stands, Leeds, Fulham, Leicester, Villa, Wolves, Brighton, and then you go into Liverpool on October the 22nd, I think.
Yeah. I think Liverpool's the next Saturday home game, isn't it?
Are we piling too much pressure on ourselves in a sense by looking at these fixtures and thinking these are the easiest ones?
Well, I think the Liverpool game looks a home banker at this moment in time. Speaking
after seeing last night, oh my god, what happened there? Alexander, you've seen the clip of Alexander Arnold and Gomez like statues, I take it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's frightening thinking about it. I mean, Fulham again. Should that game go ahead, Mitrovic, he's not going to score in the Premier League. Worrell can handle him, and suddenly that doesn't look to be the case. So things seem to be changing every game. I also think any team needs a little bit of luck to get going, to kickstart the season. Now, we think about the last season and being in that Tuesday wet evening at Bristol. You kind of sensed it, even at the time when we came back to win with those 2 goals in at a time. You even sensed it, not that we were going to get promotion, but you just sensed that, that's the starting point. That's a bit of luck that we needed, not to win the game, but you just need that little bit of luck. And you just need something like that to kickstart and give players confidence to go out and do what they need to do. So we need that from somewhere. And that's not because we're useless or anything, but any team just needs that moment to kickstart a season. Looking at the other teams as well, you also need a bit of luck in terms of when you play them too. It would be nice. It would be nice with Brighton. What's happened at Brighton? You wonder how they're going to react. Bournemouth as well. On paper, we thought that would be a good time to play them. Turns out it was a horrific time to play them on the back of the 9-0 and Gary O'Neill changing the team, and suddenly they had nothing to play for. So they were a dangerous opponent at that time, looking back. And obviously with Leicester, who knows what's going to go on at Leicester in the next sort of 10, 11 days too. So it's such a changing landscape all the time. And I guess all we can do is I can hear Steve Cooper's voice now, just focusing on us, seeing if we can manage to find a rhythm and some kind of formula that's going to work. And I guess it seems to me Cooper tried to do that for the first four games, perhaps have some kind of settled team. And it seems like in the last couple of games, for very good reasons, we can surmise that there's been a few changes in team selection, which is not in itself a bad thing. But I guess over the next couple of games, it'd be nice to see some kind of settled team and that starts to gel, that starts to come together, that starts to show us that there are some partnerships building up over the field, in different parts of the field. So they're not must-win games, but I do think they're games in which we need to see some kind of grass shoots of performances and development coming together in these games.
So how big a challenge do you think he's got then, Cooper? Because you rightly say, and I agree about, we need a period of stability, but we also need to find out what a best 11 is. And if he puts out the 11 against Bournemouth, he's putting his not his head on the chopping block, obviously, but he's at risk of being seen to be stubborn. So it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
It is, and this is why I think the pressure's building. And I think one of the things when a club does what Forest have done, and this is something we're going to have to suck it up and own, basically, when you do what we've done, when you sign 21 players, you're going to be scrutinised. You're going to live and die by that. And how that is perceived is obviously purely is going to be based on results. So, what is simple, really. We are currently being sort of mocked or laughed at in various quarters, and we've all seen the various memes, which are funny first time, and then they're just tedious. But it seems funny to me seeing Forest fans getting touchy about this. This is the path we've chosen, so we're going to have to embrace it and own it, basically. And if we continue to stumble and scratch around for results over a sustained period of time, because we are going to, this is the Premier League, this is where we are. But if that continues, and the longer that continues, the more that the strategy we've adopted is going to be seen to not working. Yes, we need to build a new squad. Of course we do. But also we have decided to release lots of players as well. So like it or not, for right or wrong, this is the path we've chosen. I think Cooper's job is really, really difficult because we saw how he could do it last season. He put a squad together. He mainly stuck with a kind of a settled sort of first 11 anyway, or at least a first sort of 14. And that served him really, really well. And we got the results. And obviously, we know what happened. But trying to mould a squad from arguably a bigger pool with a more disparate range of players in a league that's incredibly challenging. Well, we know Cooper's an excellent coach, but this is a huge task for him, I think.
Just before we go, then a couple more questions. Which players from the current crop are you liking the look of so far?
Yeah, I mean, like lots of people, Mangala looked great to start with. And also the game at Grimsby, you kind of think, oh, they look awesome, and then you remember it's Grimsby as well. But it's so difficult to judge again because it's a little bit inconsistent as well. The first few games you thought the defense looked sound, and then you see the last couple of games and you think not too sure. But obviously, I think as football fans, we must sometimes guard against deciding that player X is awesome after 5 games but useless after the next 5 games. I think Nico Williams is an outstanding player. He's the one who really stands out for me. Defensively, gets forward, does exactly what you can imagine a Steve Cooper right wing back would do. And it looks absolutely quality. So I'm really pleased that we've got a player like him as well. Lewis O'Brien as well gets through a lot of work, wins the ball. I've got to be honest, when we played Huddersfield, probably because I was wrapped up in other things watching us and just being nervous about us, but I didn't really notice him that much. And maybe I'll be laughed at for that if I don't know how good he was. But when you see him now play for Forest, you can see his absolute skill and quality on the ball. And what really impressed me is that the Newcastle game, you could sense that it was so fast and you worried about whether he's got the pace. But again, football punishes you harshly when you form an opinion on a snap judgment. And we can see since then that he's managed to learn and to adapt and really grow incredibly quickly. So, Williams and Lewis O'Brien seem to be really adapting fantastically well for me. And Yates, when he came on at Everton, I was worried. He was outstanding. But then obviously a few games later, well, as the narrative tells us that Yates is not good enough. So again, it comes back to what I'm trying to say, Matt, is we need a bigger sample size.
Yeah, I agree with all that about Yatesy and all the players you mentioned. I wrote about it the other week. I'm glad we've got Nico Williams permanently and not on loan, having watched that Napoli game. I don't think they might want him back. Considered their best right back had a shocker, and his deputy who's playing central defence was even worse, if that was possible. So
it was just crazy, and you start to think, well, I wish we were playing Liverpool in the next couple of weeks. Actually, we might even have a chance. But what will happen is Man United will be soaring by Boxing Day, and whereas again, when we saw them lose to Brentford, I'm sure, like many other fans, I was thinking, yeah, I fancy playing Man United now.
Exactly. The pendulum swings very quickly, as I said on Monday with Fletch and Greg. Just tell us before we go then, the plug for the book. The floor is yours.
So available from all usual outlets, all respectable ones and less respectable ones. So you know the ones. And I'm optimistic as well in negotiations with the club to do a signing in the club shop as well. So that'll be, if that happens, that'll be great because it'll be very quiet on that day. So if I am signing books in the club shop, then that's the time to go and get the new shirt as well, because the club shop will be absolutely empty if I'm in there. So I'm not sure that's going to happen, but that's one of the things we're sort of in discussions with at the moment. But from various outlets, it's 120,000 words. It's hardback as well. So even if you don't fancy reading it, it makes an excellent doorstop. And obviously, with the winter situation around the corner, there's a stack of pages to be burning if you need to put them on the fire. So reasons enough to buy it. And there's also some pretty pictures in it too. So I'd be really grateful if you would even consider buying it.
Yes, not that anyone would burn it, but it might be the most economically efficient use of books these days. Sadly.
Absolutely. So yeah, times are tough, but like I said, I'd be really grateful if you'd even consider it. Thank you. That'd be great.
Well, it's called Reds and Rams, The History of the East Midlands Derby, as I said, and it's out now. We shall be back, I don't know, as I said, with the news today about the Queen passing. We will be back next week at some point, whether it's reviewing Leeds or looking ahead to Fulham or a general state of play, but we will be with you with, one of the normal lads, and I shall arrange a guest to be confirmed. So thanks for everyone who watched along. I hope you enjoyed this as normal. As ever, if you did, do like and subscribe and give us a good review on iTunes. In the meantime, David, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
And thanks again to everyone who watched, and we shall see you soon.